everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Eclectic Reader. So today I am doing my reading wrap-up for the months of May and June. I never did a reading wrap-up for May. And actually, I think this is a good idea to make a wrap-up for 2 months instead of 1, because over the 2-month period, I read, I think, 8 or 9 books. So I think this is a good idea. I read a lot of books that I enjoyed. I only gave like maybe 1 or 2 books 3 stars. So almost all the books here are 4 or 5 stars. I had a great time. Most of them are cozy mysteries, of course, and I read 2 works of nonfiction. So let's begin. The first book that I read was a memoir, Getting Schooled: The Re-Education of an American Teacher by Garrett Kaiser. I gave this book 3 stars. So this is the memoir of a teacher who's also a freelance journalist. He's returning to the school that he taught at in rural Vermont after 14 years of not having taught there. He's now returning. So he used to teach at the school, but then for 14 years he was a journalist, and now he's back teaching at the school. He is an English teacher. And while the school is very under-resourced, a lot of the students come from poverty, they actually do pretty well on the state tests. So they are reaching the standards, but nevertheless, the students do face various challenges. Many of them work on the farm before and after school. He talks about the challenges that these students face, but he also talks about the challenges that he faces as he relearns how to be a teacher. It's 2014. This is when this book was published, so he probably wrote the book 1 or 2 years before that. And the system has changed in very dramatic ways. Now everything is online. He has to enter all the grades. There's this huge emphasis on data. He doesn't particularly like that, so he does talk about some of the things that he finds irritating about teaching. I thought that it was well written, though at times felt like I was reading an essay. And yes, he's an essayist, but sometimes it just didn't fit the genre that he was trying to write in. And I felt like that took away from his own story. So I wish that he had used a more journalistic writing style, which was clearer, shorter sentences, better organized. At times I felt like there was just a little bit too much purple prose. The other thing is that he is a little bit critical of technology. And while, yes, I definitely think that students are maybe using social media too much, and this can get in the way of education, at times it's just him complaining about having to use technology, and I thought that he was overly negative at times. But still, this was a really great memoir. I hope to read more teachers' memoirs, maybe books that have been published in the last few years, especially since the pandemic. Lots of teachers have been leaving the profession. This is interesting to me because I'm actually trying to move into classroom teaching in K-12. So I'm trying to read more memoirs, and I would definitely recommend this book. I think it's interesting to read his journey and also to see the kinds of challenges that rural schools face. His wife is a pre-K specialist. She's a researcher who focuses on preschool age children, and particularly children with autism. And he talks about how little respect preschool teachers get from just other teachers, let alone from the wider public. And so I thought that was really interesting. So there's a lot in this book that's really interesting, but also sometimes the prose got in the way of that. The second book that I read was a cozy mystery, which I gave 5 stars to, and that's Friday, The Rabbi Slept Late by Harry Kemmelman. The rabbi is David Small. He is, I think, in Massachusetts. He's the head of this synagogue, and he comes from a background of rabbis, and he thinks of a rabbi as more of a lawyer, as someone who really deliberates about the Jewish law. And in fact, according to him, that is what a rabbi was originally. Now, the members of his congregation have different goals for the synagogue. They want him to be, to be more involved in the wider community, just like the churches are. He is, however, more of a scholarly person, and so he's not incredibly social. But because of his knowledge of Jewish law, he approaches cases very interestingly and helps deal with the conflicts in his parish in a very interesting way. I found that to be so fascinating, learning about Jewish law and some of the ways in which the ancient rabbis addressed certain cases, the same kinds of cases the secular law deals with, might be approached slightly differently by a rabbi. Now, a woman in this story is murdered, and he becomes involved in the investigation. Of course, he's not supposed to get involved in the investigation. In many ways, this story is like, the Father Brown mysteries. So if you like the Father Brown mysteries, I highly recommend reading this book, and I will continue with the series. I found David Small to be such a fascinating character. Rabbi Small, he doesn't exactly dress well, he's not very eloquent, but he's incredibly intelligent, and he just has a certain personality that is just very unique in the cozy mystery genre. So highly recommend, 5-star read. The third book that I read was Winterhouse by Ben Gooderson, which is the first middle grade mystery that I read in May, and I gave that book 4 stars. Now, while this is a mystery, I wouldn't say that it's a very typical mystery. At least it's not a typical middle grade mystery. We follow Elizabeth Summers, who lives with her aunt and uncle, whom she despises, and they seem to not care for her very much either. She is suddenly sent on holiday to this hotel that is run by a very mysterious man named Norbridge Falls. She's also fascinated by certain other holiday goers. There's a couple, for example, who seems to be very unpleasant. They're also really interested in her, and she doesn't exactly know why. And a lot of weird things are happening at this hotel, and she's trying to, she's very into puzzles. Elizabeth Summers can solve any puzzle. She helps solve a 30,000 piece puzzle. She helps out in finding pieces for the puzzle. There seems to be some kind of puzzle at the heart of this hotel, and so she and a boy at the hotel named Freddie decide they're going to try to figure out what's going on. I had a really great time, but like I said, this was not a very typical mystery. It is a mystery, but there are some other things going on in this book. I definitely will be continuing with the series. I'm interested in following her journey. The 4th book that I read in the month of May was Night of the Werecat by Eileen Watkins, which I gave 4 stars to. This is book 6 of the Cat Groomer mystery series. And actually, this is the most recent release, and it came out in 2022. It's one of the few times when I'm actually reading recent releases. Now, this is not a phenomenal series, but it is a solid cozy mystery series. It hits all of the beats. It's actually one of the first series I got into, which is the reason why I continue with it, despite the fact that at times I feel like things are a little bit too convenient. But this one actually was a lot better than the last mystery that I read. I think the last mystery I read was the 4th in the series, and it was repeating a cliche, a certain trope that I found in the previous book, and so I was hoping that this book would be different, the 6th one, and it was. So I was really happy about that. We're following Cassie McGlone, who runs a cat boarding house and groomer. She is just really good with cats. I love learning about cats. I don't have any cats myself, so I think that that's really interesting. I think it's the atmosphere of the shop that really draws me into this series the most. She has a boyfriend named Mark, who's fine. I don't think that he's particularly special. I don't feel very connected to him, but he's not toxic in any way. I just wish I would learn more about Mark. And Mark is more of a central character in this book than in the other books. In this one, so he's a vet, and his veterinary clinic is broken into by someone who was clearly trying to get hold of the drugs, the drugs that are used in anesthetizing the animals. And so, Cassie's trying to clear her boyfriend's name. And also she's just, always getting involved in things, and she has a great rapport with the detective, which is not realistic, okay? Detectives would never allow ordinary people to get involved in the investigation, but that is, again, something to expect of this genre. So I think if you want a fun cozy mystery series, I definitely recommend this series in general. And this book was actually really good. I would say it's quite solid. It's one of the better books in the series. The fifth book that I read is another favorite on BookTube, and that is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden, which is the first book in the Winterhouse trilogy. And I gave it 4 stars. So this is a book that is very clearly based on Russian mythology and folklore. We are following Vasilisa. She's less traditional. She's a non-traditional girl growing up in a fairly traditional community that still believes in the old religion. And she also believes in the spirits. There are spirits in the house, there are spirits in the forest, and there are spirits, like there are horse spirits that protect the horses in the barns. And, you know, she supports them. She knows that these spirits are good, but there's a priest that is placed in the village who believes that the spirits are demons. And so does her stepmother, whom she doesn't get along with at all. So there's a clash of religions. There's also a clash of like values when it comes to women and the women's place. She, you know, is supposed to get married, but she doesn't want to. She's more of the tomboy. And I have to say that I'm perfectly okay with the not like other girls trope, as long as it's not, you know, insulting more feminine women. Like I think that it's interesting to follow women who break away or who do not conform to some of the societal norms and like following their experience. So that aspect of it I think is really interesting. It's very beautifully written, but there's also a frost demon who is genuinely a demon, and so she knows that there is indeed evil lurking in the forest that is threatening her village, but it's not the kind of evil that the priest thinks it is. It was really gripping, and you know, I hope to return to it very soon. First book that I read in June was Dim Sum of All Fears, which is book 2 of the Noodle Shop mystery series by Vivian Chen. I gave it 4 stars. I really love this cozy mystery series, particularly because it takes place in Cleveland, and I'm a Clevelander, so I just love knowing that this book takes place in Cleveland, and actually most of the places are actual real places that I've heard of, that I know fairly well, so that's a lot of fun. We follow Lana Lee, who is working for her parents' noodle shop. Her mother is Taiwanese American, and her father is British American. She's working for them because she suddenly quit her job. I don't even think I know where she used to work. And then she broke up with this boyfriend who's of Italian descent, named Angelo, I think, and she doesn't like thinking about him, but he does come up from time to time. And she's trying to get away from all of that, and so now she's working for her parents' noodle shop house. She wishes that she could work maybe an office job. In fact, she has an interview at the beginning of the book, but suddenly her parents decide to go to Taiwan because one of their family members is sick, and so she is now in charge of the restaurant while her parents are gone. And the couple who is renting the store next door is found dead, both of them, and it's deemed a suicide. But Lana's not convinced it's a suicide. She actually really liked the woman who was one of the 2 running the shop, and so she feels really bad. She wants to bring justice to her. Her husband, though, had a whole past. I mean, it seems like he had been married several times before because his ex-wives want a piece of the shop. Like, they claim to, you know, be next in line to inherit this shop. And so she's trying to figure out, you know, who are these women? What is this man's past? You know, is he involved in any way in his own death and the death of his wife? She's very nosy. She's constantly getting involved in things that she's not supposed to, along with her roommate who runs a bar. And she's also dating the detective, which is a trope I don't usually like in cozies, but this is a fun series, and I think that if you're looking for a cozy mystery series to get into, the new Noodle Shop mystery series is definitely great. I gave this one 4 stars. It was not as good as the last mystery, but it was still pretty solid. 7th book that I read, or the 2nd book that I read in the month of June, was The Pot Thief Who Studied Pythagoras by J. Michael Arendoff, and I gave that one 4 stars. Now, is this a cozy mystery series? well, you can decide for yourself. It is definitely a mystery series that does not contain like any graphic violence or, anything explicit. So in that way, you could consider it cozy. But our sleuth is a man, and he's not entirely likable. That is, unless you share his political views. So one of the comments on Goodreads talked about how, our protagonist is a libertarian. And I would say, yeah, he's definitely a libertarian. I don't share his political views, but I also find him to be a really fascinating character, and I think that he's written very well. So our protagonist is Hubert Shoes. He is a pot thief, though he doesn't think of himself as a thief. What he does is unearth pots on public lands, which is technically illegal. Congress has declared it illegal to do that. But he doesn't think it's illegal because those pots aren't claimed by anyone, so he doesn't see what he's doing as illegal at all. And over again, he finds ways to justify his actions. And I think that's what's really interesting. He has a moral compass, and we come to see that, he has a set of standards, but they're not necessarily the standards that are, like the government standards. And yes, he's very suspicious of the government. So he's not always very likable, but he also is kind of compelling. And I really love learning about him. Basically, somebody comes to him and asks him to steal a pot from a certain museum. Now, there are two pots, one in one museum and one in another museum. The same day he is asked to steal a pot at one museum, the pot at the other museum is stolen, and he's accused of having stolen that pot. Now, he's considering stealing the pot. He remember when he was, he is a pot thief, but he never steals from museums, so he's thinking of how he can justify stealing the pot from the museum without getting caught. But at the same time, he wants to clear his own name because he's now suspected of stealing the other pot, and then a person is found dead at a hotel that he had visited. So now he's wondering, who's the person who was killed, and how can I clear my name? If you're okay with a little bit of that political element in your books, then I would definitely recommend it. The next book that I read is the second work of nonfiction that I read, and it is a book of self-help. It is Influence is Your Superpower, The Science of Winning Hearts, Sparking Change, and Making Good Things Happen by Zoe Chance. I gave it 4 stars. I love learning about negotiation and influence. These are topics that fascinate me. I also study rhetoric, so I just wish that some of these authors would actually discuss Aristotle and Cicero, whose ideas I think relate to this discussion about negotiation and how negotiation operates. Zoe Chance's thesis is one that, like I said, philosophers have known for thousands of years, and that is that logic is not the primary means of persuasion. Like, people aren't as motivated by logic as we might like to think. That includes us. We are mostly motivated by our emotions, by other factors. And knowing that means that we can use that to our own advantage, not in a manipulative sense, because we're always giving people the freedom to say no, but that knowing that we can use some of the strategies that she promotes to get promotions, to get a raise, to, make good things happen in our lives. This book is definitely like Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, which is another book in the same genre. And I would definitely recommend both books. What I did like about Zoe Chance's book that I felt was missing in Chris Voss's is that she does distinguish between real negotiation and real persuasion, like genuine persuasion that allows people to have the freedom to say no, and like scamming people or manipulating people. She does distinguish the two, and she talks about how we can see the difference ourselves. At times, Chris Voss, who was a hostage negotiator for the FBI, some of the tips he gave, I remember thinking, like, predators use these tips, So I think that Zoe Chance does a good job in like distinguishing between, what abusers and manipulators do, and like what, she would recommend, and what real negotiation and persuasion is. So this was very well written. The examples she gives are really clear. She gives great strategies. And I think this is one of the best self-help books that I've read in a long time. And the final book that I read is How to Get Away with Myrtle by Elizabeth C. Bunce. This is the second book of the Myrtle Herdcastle mystery series, and I gave it 4 stars. So Myrtle Hardcastle is a 12-year-old girl who wants to be like her father, who is a solicitor. He is, I guess, involved. He's like a prosecutor in criminal cases, and Myrtle wants to be like her father. But this book takes place at the turn of the 20th century, and her father does not encourage his daughter, to get involved in this sort of thing. She has a governess named Miss Judson who is much more supportive of her interests. But because of the events of the last book, Myrtle's father has sent Myrtle, Miss Judson, and their aunt, Helen, on holiday. Myrtle is not too excited about it. She doesn't really want to go on holiday. She'd rather, get involved in forensics. Of course, she does in the second book. On the train ride to the English coast, she meets Mrs. Bloom. Mrs. Bloom is an insurance investigator who is in possession of a priceless tiara that she is protecting. Unfortunately, Mrs. Bloom is found dead in the baggage car with Aunt Helen's scissors in her back, and the tiara has been stolen. Of course, Myrtle, who is very curious and always getting involved in things, decides to investigate. This was a great book. I gave it 4 stars, and I would definitely recommend it to anyone who likes cozies. Even if you don't like middle grade, I would say that the series, even though it has a child protagonist, doesn't always read like a middle grade book. I would be interested in knowing if children actually can follow the story. Sometimes I think it's a little bit complicated, but not overly complicated. And actually, I found the conclusion to be very satisfying. I hope to continue with the series. I have the 3rd book out from the library. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what your favorite book was in the month of June or May. Thank you everybody for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.